Hello, everyone. We're so glad that you are joining us for our Wonder Chat for Parents. I'm just going to give it a few more minutes. My name is Kim Fryer, and I am the National Program Director with Wonders and Worries. And I'm just going to give it not a few minutes, just a few seconds for a few more people as they're logging on. And then we will jump in. Um, Ashley, go ahead, or Katie, sorry, go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just introduce our topic today. We're so glad that all of you are here. My name is Kim, if you missed that, and I will be moderating today's presentation. Welcome to our latest Wonder Chat, Understanding Illness Together, Activities for Children and Teenagers Throughout Your Medical Journey. A few housekeeping items before we get started. If you are attending the live webinar, you will be able to ask questions to the presenters in the Q&A feature. Also, if you would like to communicate with other participants, you are able to use the chat feature. I will be monitoring both throughout the presentation. And if you are watching the recorded webinar, you can email questions to our helpline at helpline@wondersandworries.org if you have any questions. And then we will also be sharing a copy of the slides with those attending live. And if you watch the recorded version, you can email our helpline at helpline@wondersandworries.org to request the slides. Okay, so the next slide, our presenters today, Katie Hart and Ashley Blackman, are two amazing child life specialists. I'm so honored to get to share them with you and have them share their expertise with you. We are very grateful to them sharing their knowledge and insight today. We want to make you all aware that some of the content in today's presentation may bring up emotions for you. We recommend that you take care of yourself and step away if needed. We encourage you to call our Wonders and Worries helpline at 844 We Wonder, which is 844-939-6633. If you would like to talk about any of the topics discussed today, or if you would like individualized support for your family. We're glad you are tuning in and we welcome you. I am going to turn it over to Katie and Ashley.
Thanks, Kim. So before we jump right into our topic for today, we do want to take a second just to highlight our wonderful organization. We have an amazing team that you're getting to meet two of us or three of us this morning, this afternoon, but we have a huge team that has helped not only with a lot of the content because this is things that we do on a daily basis when we're working with families, but our main mission is really just to help children of parents who are diagnosed with an illness or injury cope and navigate everything that entails with that. And so today we're going to be a little bit specific in regards to what we're talking about, but if at all through this presentation you're curious about maybe some more questions or you have other thoughts that brought to mind and you would like some help just navigating this, we really encourage you to reach out to our team. We definitely want to help. So for today's presentation, we're going to try and talk mostly about just the benefits of honest and ongoing conversations, especially in regards to talking about a diagnosis. We're going to specifically talk about things like heart disease, transplant, and ALS. However, a lot of the activities that you'll notice in today's presentation, we're hoping that you can just get an idea of how you would modify them if a diagnosis is not covered that maybe you're curious about. In addition to those three diagnoses, we're also going to have a set of activities at the end that we'll walk you through that we find to be really helpful in regards to talking about emotional expression with your children. Because if you're talking about any sort of illness or diagnosis, especially if it's a new one, odds are your children are going to have some emotional outlet that needs to be had. And so we're hoping that that also helps as well at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to just jump right in. So I love the question on this slide. This is actually a real question that I have been asked pretty much throughout my entire time practicing as a child life specialist. Parents will ask me, do I really need to tell them what is happening? I don't want to scare them. And I do want to acknowledge that the intention behind this question is always such a good one. And I like to remember that children pick up right on a lot of things that we may not even realize. And so if we're able to talk to them in a honest way, an approachable way about what is going on, this can help mitigate anything that maybe they're coming up with on their own. So when I'm working with families, I usually will discuss this topic a little bit with, the idea that protecting your child in regards to this question can mean sharing information, just in a very more developmentally appropriate way and approachable way. And we're hoping that by the end of this presentation, you feel more confident in those things. I also love this quote. So it doesn't matter your background or experience. One of the parents we worked with said, when you have to tell your child this kind of news, you want to do it the right way. And we didn't know how. So we called our team at Wonders and Worries. And something I just want to highlight with this quote in particular is there are so many right ways to have a conversation with your child. It is not a black and white situation, like I'm sure many parents are hoping that we're going to say today, but in reality, it's not, right? And you know your child best. So throughout this presentation, I also really encourage you to think of your children, or maybe you're a clinician logging on to figure out how to best support parents you're working with and their children. Think of your children and kind of what would work best for them, and kind of use that as we go through today. Now, if you are like, Katie, I have no idea where to begin. This is overwhelming. I just found out about my diagnosis. I am not even sure how to go about this. Here are some basic steps that I'm hoping you'll find helpful, at least in guiding you in that conversation initially. The first step probably seems a little bit obvious, but is great to start in, is asking your child what they think your illness is. What do they already know about it? Do they want to draw it out, act it out? Are there different ways that your children express their understanding of things that wouldn't just be a verbal conversation? Do they know anyone with your illness, right? And if you are knowledgeable of someone who in your family, in your community has that illness, can you already kind of foresee maybe some questions or concerns that may come up with that? After you've kind of assessed what your child already knows, the next step is going to be to try and explain it in a very developmentally appropriate way. And I'll kind of jump into some considerations for developmental level and things like that in a few slides. But think about it in terms of, right, your body and the roles that your body has and different things. For example, we'll talk about transplant for part of this. A lot of times when I'm talking about that, I like to first assess the child's understanding of, do you know what, for example, your lungs do? Can they give you information about that? Oftentimes too, when you have children at school age or adolescents who are in school, you might be surprised to find out that they've learned about some of these topics in school. You can kind of build off that knowledge. And then the third step is going to be really important. And usually the part I get asked most questions about are all these misconceptions. So one of the biggest misconceptions I think that we find that families will talk to us about is that your child is afraid that they caused your illness, right? It's really common when you have, for example, like the 4-year-old that will all of a sudden tell his teacher, "Oh, well, I was hitting my brother, and I wasn't supposed to be doing that, and now my mom got diagnosed with MS," right? Something like that. Making sure that your child understands that it is not their fault, that there are some other factors into what go into your illness, and making sure that they feel like they have that space to come up with those questions. And that kind of ties into the fourth step, which is going to be creating this environment for open and ongoing communication. So, what I love about this is you can develop a plan depending on how your family culture is, to make sure that your children know that there's that space dedicated for them to ask questions. I worked with families that after doctor's appointments, they have a family meeting, or maybe you're someone that has every weekday a family dinner, and you can pick out a day where maybe it's giving updates about it, or they can ask questions, or maybe it's just very fluid, right? And you're going to soccer practice and notice that your child is just kind of a little bit off, more so than usual, and you can ask them just prompting questions about, what's their day like? What do they have on their mind? Things like that. But creating that space so that you can constantly talk about it, because even if your child's known about your illness for a long time, things evolve and change, just like their thoughts and experiences from the world evolve and change. And that can impact kind of what they're thinking about in regards to your illness. These are great points just when thinking about having that initial conversation about your diagnosis. I've covered quite a bit of these in regards to the slides prior to this. Obviously, being really honest about the conversation and what's going on is important. Saying the name of your diagnosis is really important so that they can kind of get that verbiage down. But I do want to highlight just a couple points here. So, saying you don't know to an answer your child asks is probably one of the most powerful things that our children can see us do, which may sound a little silly, right? I think a lot of times as parents, we feel like we have to have this pressure to know everything about anything, right? There always has to be a answer for what our children ask us. And in reality, it's an amazing learning opportunity for your child to see you basically tell them, you know what, I'm really not sure. That's an amazing question. Here's how I'm going to find the answer. And that is not only showing your vulnerable side, which can feel scary as a parent, I'm sure, but also you're modeling for them, right? That we don't always have the answer. And I'm going to do my best to find out how to get that answer or what that answer is. So I always like to highlight that just to also take some pressure off. A lot of times we're not going to know everything, and that is okay. The second point I really want to highlight is a lot of times when I've worked with families in the past, we have heard that, oh, well, I feel bad. I don't want to put something else more on their plate for what's going on. Children want to help, right? Think of you in situations where maybe it's a family member or a friend that you have heard about something that is putting extra stress on them, right? And you do want to help, right? Same things happen with your children. It's just finding a way to make some of those things that they can help with a little bit more developmentally appropriate. Are they at a level that maybe they can help pick out a couple dinners, right? Ideas a night a week. Maybe they're a teenager and just got their license and they can help actually grocery shop for you or pick other siblings up or you name it. You know your family best. But try to think of things too that they can help with that will make them feel in control and able to help the whole family as a dynamic. So I couldn't do this presentation without just highlighting this. Now, you again are the expert with your children, so I'm sure a lot of these points in regards to just developmental considerations are not necessarily any new information, but something to consider for each like developmental level, at least in regards to when you're talking about your diagnosis. These are just highlights that I think of when I'm working with these different groups. When we are working with toddlers, preschool age children, so I'm thinking like, from 3 to maybe 6 years old, the first thing that comes to mind is not only how egocentric they still are in regards to the world, right? Everything is their world and is happening in their world. It's this magical thinking stage, which is sometimes so wonderful and amazing, but also when you're talking about diagnosis can be so challenging. I have a child I always think of when I think of this age group in regards to diagnosis education. He was probably about 5 years old when I first worked with him. He was the one that was actually diagnosed with an illness, and he was very into superheroes. He had been diagnosed with a cancer diagnosis and was getting a port place, which is a device that they will place for a little bit for them to administer chemotherapy and things like that. And it looks kind of like a little button if you've never seen one. And his parents really went with this idea of he loves superheroes. He himself actually talked about the button, the port, looking like Iron Man. And at first you're thinking, oh, cool, he took this great, like, positive spin on getting this port placed and all of this. Well, then we went to go assess it for the first time, and we realized that he also came up on his own with this whole narrative of he needed to protect him and his parents, and that the nurses and the doctors were the bad guys, right? That he had to protect them from. And so, just an example of, like, how magical thinking can also go really, really far. And so it took a little bit of time, but we were able to talk to him and do certain activities that will bring him back to the more reality of what was going on, while also trying to honor that stage he was in, and still do, and say things that made him feel right, like, oh, you're doing this like a superhero, things like that. So just something to be mindful of, when you're working with this age group in particular. As we move into the school age developmental level, I'm thinking around 6 to 12 years old. What I think of is how logical they are, right? I kind of talked about how oftentimes parents want me to talk about a lot of topics in regards to black and white situations. Again, this is usually a gray area. So sometimes that is hard because they are also wanting the black and white discussion, right, of what is happening. And so, something just to be mindful of too is that your children at this age may start to just assume things based off knowledge they already have. So an example of this is, a child that assumes that maybe he'll catch his friend's mom's diagnosis of ALS, right? Because last month they went to their house and, they had a cold and they caught the cold. You kind of have to figure out and navigate those situations too, of they are making that logical step, but it's not necessarily universal to everything that you're gonna have and experience. And then as we move into the adolescent stage, and this is going to be more like teenagers, right? Empowering them to ask questions is huge. I highlighted that specifically because they are now able to think in the world in such an abstract way. But our world now is also very dominated by social media, right? I've worked with countless amount of adolescents that will tell me, oh, well, I saw this on TikTok, or this blog post said this. It's great that they have some of these resources, but again, making sure that it's individualized and the information they're getting is approachable to what you are wanting them to have information to, and about your plan, and specifically is going to, be something I would just definitely consider when you're working with children in this age. And now I am going to pass it back on to Ashley.
So, this first section is activities to promote discussion about illness. So, really, just all about getting the ball rolling, finding out what your kids may know, what they might be wondering about, and just starting that conversation about what the illness is. So, this first activity that we have is the Wonders and Worries jar. This is something we use in our diagnosis sessions. And so, something that we do with all of our clients that come through, and something that can be really helpful, again, to see where your child is with what they're thinking about your illness. So, the materials you'll need for it is a jar of some kind, colored paper cut into strips. I do about an inch thick is how I find it best works. And then any kind of writing utensil. And you can do this with all ages, with younger kiddos who may not have quite the language or the ability to write yet. You can also ask them to draw, so they're able to draw their wonders and worries. And then for older kiddos or for teens, I often describe this as a way to short journal. So I'll say, if you don't like writing a lot or keeping a journal, this can be a great way to still get those questions and those concerns out of your body so that you're not holding on to them. But it's a short way of doing that and an easy way of doing that. So this is just a great communication piece. You'll just sort of prompt them and ask them what wonders and worries they may have. So what questions or concerns they have. If they're saying they don't have any, another way I like to get the discussion going is say, okay, then tell me something that you know. Because if they don't have wonders, maybe they know things about the illness and you can get the conversation going from there. So just asking them to write those things down and then using this as a communication tool throughout the illness. So this is something you guys can encourage them to continue using. If you notice that they're having a difficult time, asking them if they'd like to add to their wonders and worries jar, or say, hey, I would really like to go through some of our wonders and worries together. Could you add a couple things this morning? And then this afternoon, we'll have a conversation about it. So just kind of a way to do check-ins and just keep that conversation going about the illness. Another modification you can do if your kiddos are really resistant to the idea of a physical jar, we've had people do this through texting. And so especially for those older teens that don't love this idea, we had a family do Cancer Fact Fridays. And so on Fridays, it was kind of their check-in time, and they would send a text of either something they learned, something they're wondering about, or a worry that they had. And then that was a way to keep that communication going. So just a creative activity to kind of get that ball rolling. The next activity we have is medical play, and medical play is great for all ages, but especially really great for ages that maybe don't quite have the language to fully communicate what they're wondering about or what they're concerned about. And so materials needed for this is you're just going to want medical supplies. Toy ones are completely fine. I would encourage you, the more realistic you're able to have, the better. We find kiddos tend to engage more the more realistic the materials able to be used are. So for example, safe syringes, obviously no needle on them, but the little tubes. And you can find stethoscopes that are very realistic, real gauze, real Band-Aids, things like that. You can use a stuffed animal the child already has if they want to do it that way. Lots of kiddos will want to bring their favorite stuffed animal to the play. Others might want a completely blank cloth doll, start from scratch, really create their own imagination as far as what's happening during the medical play. So you can do medical play specifically with a doll and acting things out that way. You can also bring some of these medical supplies into art activities. And so, for example, lots of times we'll do syringe painting, filling those syringes with paint and splattering them on paper. I've done sticker activities with Band-Aids and cotton balls and other things that we can stick on the paper together. So really anything where they're able to act out what's going on, have some experience with the medical supplies, and communicate through play, because we do know that children communicate best through playing. For older children, there are these great Lego sets and building things where you can build MRI machines. You can build different types of hospital rooms with different medical supplies. So again, you really can stretch it for all ages. It's just a different way to allow that communication to happen and allow your child to play through what they might be wondering or what they might be feeling about the illness. The last activity to kind of get the ball rolling on the illness that we have is this ask or tell activity. And this is just a really simple way to promote that communication, give everyone an opportunity to express what they might be wondering or what they know. And so for materials for this one, a stuffed animal, a ball is great, just a soft object to toss. But best for our school age population, you're just going to be tossing this object back and forth. And then the person receiving the objects gets to choose whether they would like to be asked a question about the illness or whether they would like to be told something about the illness, or they would like to tell something about the illness. And so, again, we have some prompting questions. That way we can kind of get the communication going. So things like, how did you first learn about the illness? What person do you feel comfortable talking to about what's going on? Or how would you describe this illness to a friend? So just a variety of different ways to promote that conversation, to get children comfortable through play, through games, with asking these questions, and then opening the door for additional conversation to happen from there. We do have a previous WonderChat about how to have difficult conversations with children. And so if this is something that you want a deeper dive into or you have additional questions, I would highly encourage you to check out this link. It just goes into more detail and is a really great resource for additional information on how to have those hard conversations. And the first illness that we're going to jump into some activities for and some resources for is going to be heart disease. Heart disease is an illness, of course, that has a wide variety of things going on with the heart that could potentially qualify or happen to make it heart disease. And so a lot of our activities are going to be educating about the heart, and then you can tailor it to what specifically is going on with your illness in your family to then talk further on about heart disease and what's happening. So the first activity we have is creating a heart pump activity. And so this is a great kind of more messy activity, which of course kids are all about, getting involved, getting hands-on with the mess. But that does a really great job of mimicking how our heart works and can describe how a healthy heart pumps blood. So what you'll need are 2 small jars or glasses, a balloon, 2 bendy straws, toothpick, water, red food coloring, scissors, and then a tray. The tray is to catch the mess, so you'll put all of your supplies on the tray. And then first, you're just going to start out by describing what a heart's function is in the body. So talking about how its job is to pump blood and pump oxygen throughout our body, and how that it has 2 valves, one on either side of the heart. And this activity specifically shows how one of those valves works. So we're going to look at how one of the valves works today. You will fill one of the jars with about halfway full of water, add that food coloring to mimic blood. And then you're going to cut the neck off a balloon and put the top of that balloon over the jar. You'll poke 2 holes in that balloon and put the 2 bendy straws through both of those holes. And then you'll use the neck of that balloon to tie off 1 bendy straw so that you're creating a suction or a valve, if you will. And that other bendy straw will be pointed into that other empty jar you have. If you do have access to a picture of a heart, I would highly recommend going over that with the child just so that they have a real life representation of what's happening. I have a little body book with the circulatory system as one of the pages, and we'll kind of go through what a real heart looks like so that they're able to visualize that while you're doing the activity. But once you have this set up with your 2 bendy straws, one with the balloon creating the valve, the suction on it, you're going to have the child then pump their finger in between those 2 straws on the balloon quickly. And what that's going to do is it's going to have the water go through the other bendy straw into the other glass. And then you can talk about how the pumping function is mimicking the function of the heart. So the water going through the straw mimics the valve. The valve opens when you push down on the balloon and closes when you let go. So again, this is educating about what a healthy heart looks like. And then you can take it from there as far as what your diagnosis means, what your heart disease means, and tailor it specifically to what's going on and what additional treatment you may need for your illness. The next one that we have for heart disease is the beating heart activity. This one is really great for younger kiddos that may need a more simplified version or visual of what a heart does. And so again, you'll talk about the heart being a pump, the blood pumping throughout the body, and how we have different pulse points throughout our body. And so for this activity, you're going to need large marshmallows and toothpicks and plates. Of course, a very fun part of this activity is you will get to eat the marshmallows at the end, which we know kiddos are going to be very excited about. But you're going to go ahead and use that large marshmallow. You're going to put the toothpick about halfway through and then put that large marshmallow on their pulse points. You can talk about how we have different pulse points throughout the body, but the wrist is going to be the easiest place for them to be able to see this pulse point. You'll have them lay their hand across the table, and then when that marshmallow is on their pulse point, you will get to see the toothpick move to their pulse. And so you can talk about how the heart is pumping blood throughout the body, blood carries that oxygen throughout the body, and have your child focus on the movement of that marshmallow and how the blood is flowing throughout their body. Again, then taking the conversation from there and tailoring it to what your illness means for you or your family member. Our resource recommendations for heart disease, I have 2 links here for Kids Health, which I would highly encourage you, whatever illness you're trying to address, Kids Health has a lot of really great resources for children on describing different illnesses. These ones are for the heart and circulatory system as well as heart disease. I would encourage you, if you are interested in using this link, to go ahead and watch it yourself. Be sure you feel like it's appropriate for your child, and then also just so that you know what's discussed in the video, so that when your child's watching it, you're able to take those talking points and tailor it to your illness and what is going on in your family. But both of these links are really great for discussing the heart function and heart disease. And then our other resources is a book. It's called It's My Heart. And it's written by a group of doctors, nurses, and patients, and has very simplified terms to describe heart disease, different heart conditions, and then very basic surgical interventions, different tests that can be provided. So really great way to kind of bring down the developmental level of some of what is discussed when treating heart disease to a level that your kiddo is able to understand. And there's also before and after diagrams that are really helpful in this book as well. So all of these resources would highly encourage you to check out if heart disease is something affecting your family.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley. I love that It's My Heart book. This is going to sound probably a little silly to everyone, but I've used some of those examples in that book to help explain even to my grandfather, who is in his 90s, what's going on. So honestly helpful for all ages. So I am going to try and tackle as much of transplant as we can, because transplant is another one that can be an all-encompassing diagnosis depending on what's going on. There's so many variations of this diagnosis. So the first activity I am going to start off with is actually in regards to bone marrow transplant. And I do want to highlight, we had a WonderChat fairly recently that Kim and I completed, where we pretty much did all cancer diagnoses or activities focused on specifically cancer diagnoses. And in that, there's a lot about blood cells and bone marrow transplant and things like that. So if you're even more curious after this activity, I do encourage you to check that one out, just for the sake of understanding, again, some more ideas of how you would explain this particular diagnosis. When I think of things like a bone marrow transplant, you have such abstract concepts, right? Like blood cells and bone marrow. We're really trying to make those abstract concepts become really concrete, especially for younger children to understand. So this is a great activity to do, I would say anywhere from probably around like 5 to, it could be 12 or older. But again, that idea of trying to make that abstract concept more concrete. So for this, you will need some graham crackers, pink gel frosting, or it could be anything. You could modify a lot of this to whatever you need. I've done peanut butter before, marshmallows, red hots, and caramels. And basically, the idea behind this activity is you're going to label certain things to be like certain things in your body and discuss the jobs and the roles that these things have within your body. So your graham cracker is going to be the bones that are inside of our body, and you can talk about your bones having different jobs. One of the jobs of your bones is to help make all your blood cells. That's your bone marrow, what's inside. And so that pink gel frosting could be the representing the bone marrow. And then you're going to add in your blood cells, right? And talk about what all these blood cells do to help keep your body healthy and to help keep your body functioning. So the marshmallows can be your white blood cells, and this little figure here shows a little superhero, because when we talk about white blood cells, we're often talking about these are like the fighter cells that are helping to keep your body healthy and get rid of the germs and the things you don't want in your body. The red blood cells are going to have the main job of carrying oxygen, delivering oxygen. So that's why we have a little delivery guy as the icon next to that is they're helping deliver all the oxygen throughout the body. And then the caramels are going to act as your platelets. And oftentimes with children, I can easily make the reference of, do you remember how many ever weeks ago where you told me you scraped your knee? What happened? That was your body creating that scab, right? The platelet's job is to help clot and make sure that the blood is staying inside your body. So again, you can use so many different materials. It doesn't have to be exactly this list, but think of things you have in your house that you can use to help label and give jobs to certain things so that you can make your own bone marrow. An amazing modification for teens that I use quite often is this YouTube video. Um, this was created by the American Society for Hematology. So it's more of, I'm not going to play it for the sake of time for today, but if you play it, it's definitely got more of like a Discovery Channel type feel to it. Definitely older, so usually preteen teens is who I would show this to. But it does an amazing job explaining the different roles of all the cells, and it does a pretty good animation as well. The second activity we wanted to highlight is this idea of incorporating jeopardy. And I specifically did this for a conversation about organ donation and transplant. Ideally, I would do this activity probably after having that initial conversation of what it means when your loved one is getting an organ donation. And oftentimes that does mean discussing at least a little bit briefly about, right, the role of the organ that you are having transplanted, and maybe that your organ is sick or ill or hurt, and we need to get a healthy one, right, to continue to do its job. Oftentimes that leads children to wonder, well, where did the other organ come from? And so having to explain that, this organ comes from someone whose brain is no longer able to do its job and kind of be the boss of its body. We are able to, even though their brain's not working, their other organs are working, and they and their family have made an amazing decision to help other families, so that we can have the lung, etc. However you're explaining it. But I love using Jeopardy. This could be for this. This could also be for so many different diagnoses. But I like this because it's kind of a check-in with your children, because sometimes, especially organ donation and transplant, there are questions that will come up throughout that process that you can tell your children are really, it's a lot, right, to take in for anybody. But let alone children that are constantly coming up with questions. It's kind of a great way for them to either check their understanding or for them to have that space to ask questions and things like that. So for this, what I used actually to make this slide was Jeopardy Labs, which is an online platform. It's free. You can make however many categories you want. You can score it however you want, create as many teams as you want. But if you're like, Katie, I am not technologically savvy, do not put that on me. I've used a blank wall before and just had post-it notes where we create the categories, and you can even have your children help create questions and things like that. So this is a great activity to do. Um, some examples of questions that I would use specifically for an organ donation would be, the brain has the main function of doing what, right? You're checking to see if your child has that understanding. Another part of this is surgery, right? Because in order to have this transplant, you are going to have a surgery. Have your children ever heard of surgery before? This is a great way to talk about, like, what is anesthesia? Anesthesia is that medicine that makes it so that you are not feeling or seeing or hearing anything throughout that procedure. And then I always encourage families, if you're doing any sort of illness jeopardy, to include a feelings and coping section, just because this is another way that you can kind of sneak in a way for them to do some more emotional expression that doesn't feel so vulnerable for the both of you. It's kind of right. It's a part of the game. They can answer the question or not. But one of the things I always love is, if you could, what advice would you give someone who just found out their mom or dad was sick with the same illness or was about ready to go to transplant? That'll kind of give you a good indication of kind of where their head is at currently. So lots of ideas with this activity. The next activity I have, so the next two activities are going to really be focused more on describing the organ itself and how it works and what's going on. So the first one that is fairly popular that we get consulted for is going to be lung transplants. So when you're talking about a lung, again, we've kind of talked about these abstract concepts. How do you make them more concrete? This is super fun. I have done this activity multiple times, and I always think it's fun because it feels to me like a science experiment a little bit. But the way that this will work is you'll need a clear plastic bottle. I think Gatorade's a good size just because it's big. So I do like things that are a little bit larger for this one. You'll need two balloons, some tape, and some scissors. And it's pretty simple. What you're going to do is cut about an inch or two off of the bottom of that Gatorade bottle. You'll take one of the balloons and just wrap it over the top lip. And then that second one, the second balloon, you're just going to cut the like top part, and you'll tie off the little tail end, and you'll wrap that around the bottom. And what you're going to do is, again, you can talk about how or assess what they know about your lungs, right? Where are they in your body? Can you put your hand on your belly? Do you feel your lungs moving? Things like that to also make it more interactive. But what you'll do is you'll pull that little tail of the bottom balloon, and what should happen is the top balloon should start to fill up, right? And it should mimic essentially what the diaphragm and the lungs are doing as they're filling with air and expanding. And you can kind of talk about that. Um, Another way that I do like to make this a little bit more active or engaging is thinking about ways that they can keep their lungs healthy. This can be a great segue into different variations of maybe why you're needing to talk about a lung, but I've always had pretty good feedback in regards to this activity, just also being kind of cool to see the balloons move. And the next organ that we wanted to highlight is kidneys. And I will tell you, the materials needed for this can look a little intimidating. But I encourage you, again, think of things that you maybe have in your house. So for this, we used window screening and duct tape and sand and pebbles. Um, what you could also have, though, at home are things like a colander and maybe some cheesecloth. Maybe you have extra beads lying around, or different things in your kitchen like macaroni. We're just looking for ways to help them understand that your kidneys are a really important part of your body that are going to help remove things that we don't need in our body, some substances that we don't need. They filter out that system as a part of filtering your system of our blood. So the way that this works is you would take all of the screenings materials that you have. We put duct tape over them just because we find that it can be a little sharp for children to have their hands on, and then start to explore. So use some of the sand and pebbles, combine them together and put a filter over, and throw some water and kind of see how it works, right? What's going through? If you use a bigger filter, is there more sand going through? That could mimic maybe, how part of my kidneys aren't fully working, right? They're filtering some stuff, but not all of it. And that can also lead into a conversation about dialysis and why you have to go to this dialysis center to have a machine that's going to help your body do those things because your kidneys can't do that currently. But again, just trying to think of ways to make these concepts a little bit more concrete for children. The other activity I wanted to highlight for transplant is really simple. I really do love this because you can find these molds on Amazon. They have different body part molds, which I know if you're probably like, how did you start to go down that rabbit hole? In the child life specialist world, we tend to have a lot of fun things in our Amazon carts. But this is really cool. The little, fourth grade Katie that was so obsessed with like organs and all this would have like thrived knowing that this was an option. But this is really fun because you can use Jello, like we've put on the materials needed here. I've used Play-Doh before. But the idea is that you're just wanting that space to help create that conversation about what that transplant's going to be. So I've had a friend that will use like two different trays, and I'll just use lung as an example here, but she would put like part of one of the lungs as like healthy and pink and the other lung as like blue Play-Doh, right? And that's in the one tray of their body. And then she would take another mold and have like another pink lung ready to go and just have different like play surgery materials out, like think like Play-Doh kits and things like that. And she would have her families basically show how they're going to have surgery and take this lung out because it's having a hard time keeping the body healthy and doing its job, and that we're going to put this one in and this one is going to be healthy and they can do X, Y, and Z again. Um, Again, you're able to kind of start to have those conversations. Does your child know what surgery means? Do they know maybe about the expectations after a surgery like this? Do they know what anesthesia is? It'll kind of prompt, again, some conversation about what that means and what that looks like. And then the final activity I want to highlight in transplant is more actually about, okay, now you've had your transplant. I'm overwhelmed because they're saying that it is flu season and my 4-year-old cannot come into the hospital to visit me right away. Maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed, right, by the post-transplant side of things as well. This is a great activity to do just to keep that connection virtually with your children. That is a little bit more than maybe your FaceTime check-ins or story time check-ins or whatever you're planning to do virtually. This makes it a little bit more fun in the game, especially for younger ones. So you've probably heard of these Simon games, or I'm thinking like a Bop It type game. But the game will kind of show a sequence, and it's a game where you have to remember the sequence, right? The same idea is for this activity to do that just on your own. And all you'll need is, for example, like a FaceTime or a virtual platform, maybe some music. One family I worked with, their 6-year-old daughter loved Taylor Swift. So every time they did this, it was a different Taylor Swift song. And she was much better at remembering the sequence than her father. But um, again, a way to make it fun. And if you're post-transplant and you're like, Katie, I can't get up out of bed yet and move and do X, Y, and Z. Start simple. You start the song and your move is a head nod, and then she does a princess wave. And there's different ways that you can build on this that'll make it fun and engaging. And then when we're talking about resource recommendations for transplant, these are the 3 books that we love. Mommy Can Play is interesting. It's actually created and illustrated by families that have gone through transplant. So it's interesting with that perspective. A transplant for Ivy is going to be about Ivy, the child's experience of going through transplant. So there is that piece of it, but I will say it does a really good job of going through the entire process of like getting called to transplant. And then my Nona's Boo Boo is interesting because especially if you have younger ones that are really frustrated about, well, how come dad can't do this? Gio, the character in this book, he goes through all those different emotions of being frustrated and upset that his Nona can't do certain things. So it's a really validating book for younger children in regards to this process. And then Ashley highlighted the Kids Health Organization. They're wonderful. They also have great resources for kidney transplant.
All right, our last specific diagnosis that we're going to go through activities for is going to be for ALS. But I would encourage you while we're going through these activities to think of any illness that kind of has that mind muscle disruption, if you will. So things like stroke as well. MS, any of those diseases where the brain isn't able to completely communicate with the body, a lot of these activities can be good for and are definitely applicable. The first one is a body map activity. And I love this activity and I've used it with many different illnesses, but it's simple and it's a lot of fun for kids to work through. So you'll just need a body outline of some kind, markers, and butcher paper. I have done this where it's like small on a paper and you're just cutting out a body. And I've also done this, which kids think are really fun, especially if it's like a younger school age, to actually trace their body and then cut it out. So it's like a life-size representation of a body for them. But you're going to start by just having them decorate this body however they would like it to be. And then in some way designate what part of the body the illness has affected. And so this can be by coloring the part of the body. It can be by drawing X's on the body to signify that it's not working the way it used to, but have the child direct it by showing what part of their loved one's body that the illness is affecting. And then you can talk about what's different about that body part, and then also what the person affected is needing to help with that part of the body that's no longer working like it used to. So whether that's a wheelchair, whether that's maybe we're looking at a feeding tube or a communication device or a special grab bar for the shower. There are lots of different ways we can help the body, even though it's not working like it used to, and you can talk about those things. And then my favorite part is then turning the body over, and on the back of it, having the child come up with ways that they're still able to spend time with their loved one and things they are able to do together. So kind of ending the activity on a positive and hopeful note, and having them designate, what they're still able to do, or maybe different ways that even though the body part isn't working as it should anymore, that they're still able to spend that quality time together and do things together that they both still enjoy. The next activity is a neuron creation activity. So with ALS, we know our neurons are what's affected and why we're not communicating with our muscles well. And so this is a great way to help depict that part of the body that's so abstract for a lot of kiddos. So talking about how motor neurons are not necessarily working properly, and then they're found in the nerves. And then you'll have pipe cleaners for this, a lot of different beads, which we've designated what kind of different beads you might need in 4 different colors, and then scissors as well. We have the little step-by-step pictures showing how to actually make the neuron. And then this can promote conversation about what neurons are, how doctors don't quite know what causes ALS, so there's not medicine we can take to cure ALS. Again, promoting that conversation on how this is why ALS is not contagious. You can't catch ALS. You didn't do anything to cause ALS. But this is how it's affecting our loved one. And these are the things that they're going to be doing now, whether that's using a wheelchair, feeding tube, et cetera, moving forward. This other ALS activity book is an amazing resource that is easily found online. And I liked this activity book a lot because it was not only a great resource for education, but you are able to customize it for what your family needs. And so it has all of the printouts online, easily able to be printed, and then you can go through it and keep what you think your child would enjoy or what applies to your family. You can also toss whatever does not make sense for you and your family at this time. But it had a lot of great education and simplified verbiage to describe ALS to children, as well as a lot of hands-on activities to then promote understanding of what's going on in the body. So it has things like brain jokes, word searches, motor neuron, like the mapping, There were different coloring activities in the book if your kiddo's a big colorer, matching different emotions to faces, and then also memory box making. So creating a memory box out of different materials. So it had a lot of really great activities. And again, I would just encourage you to go through it beforehand and pick what makes sense for your family and your situation. The last activity we have for ALS is this experiential game. And so allowing a child to experience what it might be like to have a disease that is affecting our body's ability to do things as it normally would. So we have oven mitts, asking the child to put on oven mitts and do activities like holding a book and turning through pages or picking up a small item. Borrowing a wheelchair and having them experience what it's like to be in a wheelchair and not be able to reach things that might be up a little taller. Putting ankle weights on and doing simple activities around the house or running around, hopping on a leg, seeing how that feels to their body, and then sitting down and kind of feeling that heaviness and that relaxation of not being able to move our muscles the way we normally do. As well as swim fins. I love this one, but having them wear one swim fin and walk around. And it's a really weird sensation and just a different kind of feeling, but that can help describe what it might be like when our brain isn't able to communicate with one of our legs and how it's more difficult to do our daily movements that we might. So again, just a way to help them experience what that could be like and then promote the conversation afterwards about what was hard about that. What was it like to feel that way? Do you have any questions for whoever it is that has this illness? Anything that you're wondering about? Did it take you longer to do things that you're normally easily able to do? So just promoting that conversation afterwards and having them think through how it might be like to experience some of these different things. And then our resource recommendations for ALS, we have 3 different books. The first one is a booklet for children, but I will say it's pretty long-winded. What I would encourage you to do is read it alongside your child or read it before. It has amazing language and very simplified language to describe ALS, but just is quite a long resource. So taking from it and then tailoring it to what your child may be able to understand or need at this time. The ALS experience, it's different and hard, is another really cool resource. And it's actually it's where you get to choose the outcome of the book. So it's like 3 different youth, and you as the reader are choosing what's happening while it follows the stories of the youth and describes ALS really well. And then Real Kids Talk About ALS. It's a graphic novel for school-age children that uses direct quotes from youth in ALS research projects and has a really cool storyline as well to describe ALS.
Awesome. So I am going to walk us through just some emotional expression activities. We did want to create a section in today's presentation just highlighting the fact that anytime you're talking about an illness or a diagnosis, it can bring up a lot of emotions for your children, especially as they navigate a bunch of changes. And these are just some ideas of ways that you can kind of help prompt those emotions coming out in a more guided way. So the first one I'm going to highlight is this In My Heart activity. You're probably familiar with this book. We love this book. It's a great resource. If you have not already read it, I really encourage you to check out your library, check it out on Amazon. But this activity will basically follow the book in regards to we're going to have heart-shaped pieces of paper and just something to tie them all together. And what we're going to do is label each feeling on the outside of the heart. And the reason we picked the colors the way that we did was because that will follow the book. But this could really, again, be individualized to maybe what you and your family want to do or what your child wants certain colors for certain things to be. The main idea is that you're able to write out that emotion. And then on the back, The way I would do this, especially when talking about your illness, is just talk about, okay, we're going to give an example of a time that you felt mad with mom's illness, or they could draw something out. But again, gearing it more towards the illness itself and what's going on and their feelings behind it. So, pretty simple activity, different ways that you could modify it so that it's individualized to your family. The second emotional expression activity, I love this activity, partially just because I think that the worry monsters is kind of cute. I know that maybe they're not supposed to be super cute, but I do think they're cute. um, this is a poem that we will encourage families to read as you do this activity, but you can use this poem or not. The idea is, again, that your children are going to have a lot of feelings that come up, especially worries. And so this can supplement to the wonders and worries jar. This could be something completely different. But for this activity, you'll need a tissue box, something to make teeth with, like construction paper, foam, whatever you have at home, and then scissors, buttons, sequins, all the things that you can decorate your monster with. And the way that this will work is your child can write out their worries on either sheets of paper. I've had families tell me that their children love to use toilet paper because that's really popular. You could kind of modify all of those pieces as well. But what will happen is there will be a dedicated time where you do this activity, and maybe you both can write out some worries that you have, and you'll feed the worries to your worry monster. I've had families that have gone a step further, and in order to help everyone process their worries about what's going on after they've fed their worries to the monster, they'll also have the parent maybe take them out, and then you discuss the worries and maybe how, as a family, you will work through those worries. And then the children can do a more cathartic piece of ripping up the worries, like the monster would be ripping up the worries inside his belly, things like that. But another way for them to just get some of those feelings out in a healthy way. The third activity we'll highlight is pretty simple. This is called a before, during, and after activity. I specifically like this one for when thinking of working with families going through a transplant, because you are able to very clearly think about, okay, here's a prompt of how we felt before mom had her kidney transplant, or in plans of before mom having her kidney transplant. Now this is kind of how I'm feeling in the moment, and these are my hopes for after. So all that you'll do is fold this sheet of paper into thirds, mark it just like on this page, before, during, and after, and your children can write out all of these things. They can draw, just any ways for them to express kind of what's going on. The piece I love about this is in that after section and their hopes. Sometimes you'll find things on there that maybe you can have happen sooner than you think. I've had families tell me that, after they really want to go back to the library with mom. Maybe we can't go back to the library right away right now because we're in the middle of that transplant period and we have to be at the hospital. But maybe that means that you can find a book that you read together in a virtual platform, or you name it, right? Something that feels doable. And then the last activity I wanted to highlight is called an emotions playlist. So this is great, especially for our teen population. Music and musical expression is going to be a huge resource for this population. You can use things like Spotify, Pandora, YouTube. Sounds pretty simple, but it is very, very powerful. And a way that I like to encourage families to do this particular activity is actually to do it together. So what I will encourage families to do is have your children maybe think of three different emotions, right? And they pick sad, happy, angry. They can come up with some songs to basically put in those categories of songs that they'll play when they're feeling those things. But then you as a parent, you can go in too and maybe add some songs. And that's a way too for you to stay connected during those moments, and for them to have that reminder later on of, oh, I'm in my angry shuffled playlist right now, and dad's song came up from, his red hot chili pepper days, right? And that reminds me that I can talk to my dad about this, or dad and I talked about, this is what I can do when I'm angry. It's kind of just another way to secretly encourage them to figure out ways to have that outlet and also keep you connected. So super simple. And I'll hand it back over to Ashley to talk about some other resources we have.
So yes, I'm going to just quickly go through some other resources because I know we're getting tight on time. This first other resource is just books for parents. So books for you guys to read that give really great advice on how to have additional conversations, providing guidance for supporting your kiddos, helping them cope with the different challenges that illness brings. And addressing children's concerns when a parent is seriously ill. So both of these books are really helpful and have some really great information on those things. The next thing we have is our helpline. So I know Kim mentioned it at the beginning, but something you can always refer to and access if you have some more questions. If after this presentation you're looking for specific help with specific scenarios, or you're just looking for more advice for dealing with illness, you'll be connected with a child life specialist, and we have our hours, times, and website as well for that helpline to access. The last other resource we have is we do have a parenting app, if that's something you'd be interested in. It's the Wonders and Worries to Go app for parents. And it has a lot of great resources as well as categories in there that can be helpful. So things like illness communication strategies, family resources, child development and parenting, just lots of different good resources that might be helpful during this time. And lastly, for those who are watching live, please do scan the QR code. Please provide feedback. We always get great feedback from these presentations and love to use it in creating presentations moving forward. So if there's something you wish there was more expanded on or more information about, we would love to hear from you. Any questions that you may have, we would also love to address.
This has been incredible, Ashley and Katie, and we haven't had specific questions come through the Q&A, but I just wanted to ask a question kind of on behalf of many parents that this question has come to me. I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about when a parent has multiple children, if one child is really drawn to these hands-on activities and loves doing that type of thing, and another child in their family is more avoidant and maybe doesn't like to focus directly on the medical situation, how a parent might navigate that situation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I always like to meet each child where they're at, and then go from there. So the more hands-on child, sometimes the more avoidant child, seeing the more hands-on child engage in these activities, even that can help spur some interest. So allowing that child who does enjoy all the hands-on things to participate and to have access to those, as well as providing that opportunity for the more avoidant child, but then also not pressuring the child that may feel like they don't want to participate in these activities, knowing that even some observation can be helpful, and then also meeting them where they're at. So maybe they're not ready to do some of the more centralized activities that we mentioned, but maybe for example, they would really love that emotions playlist. So they're a little bit more introverted, but they would like to still have that outlet to express some of those emotions. So just taking some of the more individualized activities, maybe something that they don't have to do with all the materials and everything else, but can be a little bit more to themselves, but still express what they're wondering, and have hopefully that open conversation. Do you have anything to add, Katie?
I think all of those points are great. I also think of and I know this is hard when you are a parent with multiple children, but maybe finding some space to check in one-on-one with all of your children. Maybe your 5-year-old is a little bit more quiet and reserved with certain things, and then you go to story time and all of a sudden they're talking to you about, something completely random, right? Like just read into your children's cues. Again, you know them best, but honoring each child and, like Ashley said, where they're at.
Oh, thank you both so much. And thank you for this incredible content. So many great ideas. And thank you to all who are viewing. And we hope that you can take those ideas that seem to be a good fit for your family and just jump in and give them a try and reach out to us with any questions or needs. Thank you so much, everyone.